The grand rotunda of the Galactic Synod was not a place of light, but of shadows and whispers, a colossal cavern of obsidian and spun glass that orbited the neutral gas giant of Okana like a silent, judgmental moon. Here, beneath the vaulted ceiling that displayed the real-time movements of the galaxy's nebulae, the representatives of 1,000 stellar civilizations gathered to decide the fate of the weak, though in practice, they usually gathered to ratify the desires of the strong. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the pheromonal anxieties of a dozen insectoid races, all vibrating with a tension that had not been felt since the great schism of the previous age. At the center of the amphitheater, hovering within a containment field of pure starlight, was a jagged, desperate transmission, an SOS signal that had been repeating on loop for 3 standard cycles. It was a visual and auditory scar on the sanctity of the chamber, a recording of burning cities and skies choked with ash. The signal came from the Xylof system, a cluster of worlds inhabited by a fragile, crystalline species whose biology was as delicate as their art. They were dying. They were screaming into the void, and the masters of the galaxy were debating the political expediency of letting them perish. High Counselor Vrex, a serpentine elder of the Athari hegemony, coiled tighter around his floating dais, his scales shimmering with the dull iridescence of irritation. He looked down from his elevated position at the assembled delegates, his slit pupils narrowing as he observed the paralysis that had gripped the chamber. To his right sat the delegation from the Ethelgard Dominion, the ancient and martial empire that was currently eradicating the Xylof. The Ethelgard representatives were statues of plasteel and arrogance, their faces hidden behind combat masks that projected holographic expressions of disdain. They did not deny the slaughter. They claimed it was a necessity of order, a sanitization of a chaotic element near their borders. To Vrex's left were the terrified representatives of the lesser systems, looking to the Synod for protection that would never come. And somewhere in the back, in the dimmest recesses of the observers' gallery, sat the humans. They were the newcomers, the Terrans. They had no dais. They had no voice in the inner circle. They merely sat in their matte gray uniforms, silent, unmoving, watching the proceedings with binocular eyes that revealed nothing of their thoughts. Vrex found their stillness more unnerving than the Ethelgard's aggression. The debate raged on, a circular firing squad of bureaucratic jargon and moral cowardice. An amphibian diplomat from the Meyer worlds bubbled a protest, arguing that the Articles of Sentience prohibited planetary bombardment of non-combatant infrastructure. The Ethelgard ambassador, a towering figure draped in crimson kinetic weave, countered with a voice that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. He spoke of preventative security and sphere of influence assertions, utilizing complex legal loopholes in the Synod's charter that allowed for internal policing of border disputes. The Xylof had no military, they were scholars and glass singers. To classify their extermination as a border dispute was a grotesque mockery of justice, yet the Synod nodded along, terrified of provoking the Dominion's wrath. The Ethelgard fleet was vast, their technology ancient and cruel. No one in the Synod possessed the firepower to challenge them. The SOS continued to play, a backdrop of agony against the cold calculations of survival. The signal was a plea not just for help, but for witness. The Xylof knew they were doomed. They simply wanted the galaxy to know how they died. It was then that the sensor grid of the Synod chamber, usually reserved for tracking high-priority diplomatic arrivals, chimed with a tone that cut through the arguments like a razor. The main holographic display shifted, shrinking the image of the burning Xylof worlds to the side and replacing it with a tactical plot of the outer rim of the Xylof system. A single warp signature had been detected. It was not an Ethelgard reinforcement. It was not a Synod peacekeeper. It was a vessel of unknown configuration, possessing a mass displacement that caused the sensor readings to fluctuate wildly. The chamber fell into a stunned silence. The warp signature was heavy, brutish, and undeniably powerful. It tore through the fabric of subspace with a lack of elegance that suggested raw, unbridled energy rather than refined propulsion. As the vessel decanted from warp space into real space, the image resolved. It was ugly. It was a colossal block of gray metal, scarred by micrometeoroids and devoid of the sweeping aesthetic curves favored by the elder races. It bristled with antennae and radiator fins, looking less like a ship of war and more like a flying industrial complex. But the energy readings emanating from its core were terrifying. Vrex turned his gaze toward the back of the room, toward the human delegation. They had not moved. They had not cheered. One of them, a female with silver hair tied back in a severe knot, simply tapped a command into her wrist console. The ship on the screen was theirs. It was the TCS Vigilance, a heavy cruiser of the Terran Coalition. The name was whispered through the translation matrices of the Synod, causing a ripple of confusion. The humans were a minor power, recently ascended, known for their aggressive trade tactics and their bizarre obsession with individual liberty. They were not considered a military threat. They were considered a curiosity, yet here was a ship that dwarfed the Ethelgard destroyers currently blockading the Xyloth homeworld. The Ethelgard ambassador laughed, a harsh, metallic sound that echoed off the glass walls. He gestured to the screen with a clawed gauntlet. He mocked the Terran vessel, calling it a primitive scow, a debris hauler that had lost its way. He declared that if the humans intended to interfere, they would be added to the pyre alongside the Xyloth. The Synod held its breath. The SOS signal pulsed. The Vigilance moved forward, engaging its sublight drives. It did not hail the Ethelgard. It did not hail the Xyloth. It simply placed itself directly between the Dominion fleet and the planet below. The tension in the Synod chamber shifted from political paralysis to the visceral fear of imminent violence. Thousands of light-years away, in the cold vacuum above Xyloth Prime, the drama unfolded in real time. The Ethelgard fleet, consisting of 3 heavy battle cruisers and a swarm of frigate escorts, reoriented their targeting arrays. They were sleek, predatory ships, shaped like arrowheads and glowing with violet antimatter energies. In contrast, the Vigilance looked like a brick thrown through a glass window. It was motionless, hanging in the void, its active scanners sweeping the enemy formation. The Ethelgard commander, Fleetmaster Calith, opened a channel. His face appeared on the main screen of the Synod, broadcasting his superiority to the galaxy. He demanded the human vessel power down and prepare for boarding or face immediate atomization. He gave them 10 microcycles to comply. The countdown began. In the Synod, Vrex watched the human diplomats. They were still calm. The silver-haired woman was now looking at her datapad, reading scrolling text that seemed to have nothing to do with the standoff. It was an insult. It was a level of indifference that bordered on madness. When the countdown reached 0, the Ethelgard fired. They did not fire a warning shot. They fired a full broadside of plasma lances, weapons capable of boiling the oceans of a small moon. The beams of violet light traversed the distance in an instant, striking the Vigilance dead center. The Synod gasped. Many representatives turned away, expecting to see the human ship vaporized, its debris scattered into the stellar wind. The Ethelgard ambassador smirked, folding his arms in triumph. But the explosion did not come. Instead, the space around the human ship rippled. A shimmering, translucent honeycomb of golden light flared into existence, absorbing the plasma impact with a low, resonant hum that was audible even through the sensor telemetry. The energy was not deflected, it was eaten. The shields of the Vigilance glowed brighter for a moment, then settled back into invisibility. The ship remained unharmed. The plating was not even scorched. Silence, absolute and suffocating, descended upon the Galactic Synod. The Ethelgard ambassador's arms dropped to his sides. He stared at the screen, his holographic face flickering with a glitch of genuine shock. The physics of that impact should have shattered any shield known to galactic science. The energy output of an Ethelgard lance was absolute, yet the humans had shrugged it off as if it were a mere flashlight. On the screen, the Vigilance finally broke its radio silence. The voice that emerged was not shouting. It was not panicked. It was a deep, synthesized baritone, devoid of emotion, broadcasting on an open frequency to every ship in the sector and every receiver in the Synod. "This is the TCS Vigilance," the voice stated. "You are in violation of universal humanitarian protocols regarding the preservation of sapient life. You have attacked a vessel engaged in a rescue operation. This is your only warning. Stand down and withdraw your forces to the outer heliopause, or you will be removed." The audacity of the statement sent shockwaves through the council. A single ship, threatening an entire Dominion battle group. The Ethelgard Fleetmaster, recovering from his initial surprise, roared in fury. He ordered his fleet to engage at will. Missiles, particle beams, and kinetic rail slugs erupted from the Dominion ships, a storm of destruction designed to overwhelm any defensive matrix. The space around Xyloth Prime lit up with the fury of a dying star. The Vigilance vanished beneath a cloud of fire and radiation. The sheer volume of ordnance was enough to crack a planet's crust. The Ethelgard were not taking chances. They were pouring their entire wrath onto the upstart vessel. For a full minute, the barrage continued, a relentless pounding that shook the sensors of the observing satellites. Then the Vigilance began to move. It did not retreat, it moved through the fire. The golden honeycomb shield was now a solid sphere of brilliance, pushing aside the plasma and detonating the missiles before they could touch the hull. The human ship accelerated, its engines flaring blue-white. It drove straight toward the Ethelgard flagship, the Dominion's pride. The sheer kinetic momentum of the human vessel was apparent. It was a juggernaut. As it closed the distance, the Vigilance deployed its own weapons. They were not plasma lances or elegant beams. They were physical projectiles. Massive, magnetically accelerated slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium fired in rapid succession. The Ethelgard shields, designed to disperse energy weapons, flickered and failed under the brute force of the kinetic impacts. The slugs tore through the elegant armor of the Dominion frigates, shattering them like glass sculptures dropped on concrete. There were no explosions of fuel, just the brutal shearing of metal and the venting of atmosphere. The humans were not fighting a duel, they were conducting an execution. Inside the Synod, the atmosphere had shifted from fear to a profound existential confusion. The alien delegates could not reconcile what they were seeing. The humans, who looked so soft and unassuming, were displaying a mastery of violence that was terrifyingly efficient. They wasted no movement. Every shot landed. Every maneuver was mathematically perfect. The Vigilance plowed through the formation, crippling 2 cruisers in seconds. It did not destroy them entirely. It targeted their engines and weapons arrays, leaving the ships drifting and helpless. It was a surgical dismantling. The Ethelgard flagship, realizing the danger too late, attempted to turn and bring its heavy spinal mount to bear. But the Vigilance was already there. The human ship maneuvered underneath the flagship's belly, well within its minimum firing range. "Warning expired," the human voice broadcasted again. "Neutralizing command assets." A series of grappling beams, thick cables of magnetized alloy, shot out from the Vigilance, latching onto the hull of the Dominion's pride. The Ethelgard ship shuddered as the heavier human vessel anchored itself. Then the humans boarded. They did not beam over. They drilled. Breaching pods slammed into the Dominion hull, and for the first time, the Synod saw the human soldiers. Helmet cameras from the Ethelgard internal security grid flickered onto the main display. The Terran Marines were armored in powered exoskeletons that made them look like walking tanks. They moved with a synchronized lethality, clearing corridors with concussion grenades and flash-suppressed kinetic rifles. The Ethelgard warriors, renowned for their martial prowess, fell before them. The humans did not stop to taunt. They did not stop to gloat. They moved room by room, securing the ship with a cold, terrifying discipline. Within 10 minutes, the bridge of the Dominion's pride was breached. The Fleetmaster was subdued, not killed, but bound and forced to his knees. The feed cut to the bridge of the Vigilance. A human commander stood there, a man of middle years with a scarred face and eyes that looked like flint. He stared directly into the camera, addressing the Ethelgard ambassador back in the Synod. "Your fleet is disabled," he said. "Your crews are prisoners of war. We have secured the Xylof system. We are now establishing a humanitarian corridor. Any further aggression from the Dominion will be met with the full mobilization of the Terran Coalition Navy. We suggest you pray that we do not have to return." The transmission ended. The silence in the Synod was absolute. Vrex looked at the Ethelgard ambassador. The crimson-clad figure was trembling. For thousands of years, the Dominion had ruled through fear. In less than an hour, that fear had been transferred to a new owner. The humans had not just won a battle, they had shattered the paradigm of galactic power. The silver-haired woman in the back of the room stood up, gathered her datapad, and signaled for her delegation to leave. They walked out of the chamber with the same quiet anonymity with which they had entered, their footsteps echoing on the obsidian floor. No one dared to speak to them. No one dared to stop them. But the story was not over. The answering of the SOS was merely the prologue. As the cycles passed, the true nature of the events in the Xylof system began to leak out, filtered through the shell-shocked reports of the Ethelgard survivors and the grateful Trans. Missions of the Xylof. The humans had not just arrived to stop a genocide. They had arrived because they knew why the genocide was happening. The Xylof, in their deep excavations of their crystalline moons, had found something. They had uncovered a beacon, an ancient device of unknown origin that pulsed with a signal directed at the void between galaxies. The Ethelgard had discovered this. Their attack had not been motivated by mere territorial aggression, but by a superstitious terror. They believed the beacon was a lure, a call to the great devourers of their mythology. They were trying to exterminate the Xylof to bury the secret, to silence the beacon before it could be heard. The humans, however, did not fear the unknown. When they secured the system, they did not destroy the beacon. They studied it. They brought in their scientists, their linguists, their theoretical physicists. They cracked the code that the Ethelgard had been too afraid to touch, and what they found changed the context of the war entirely. The beacon was not a lure for monsters. It was a warning system. It was a sensor buoy left by a precursor civilization, designed to monitor the stability of the galactic halo. And it was screaming. Not because of the Ethelgard, but because something massive was moving in the dark space beyond the rim. This revelation brought a new kind of tension to the Galactic Synod. The political squabbles faded as the data from the Terran analysis was shared. The humans returned to the chamber, not as observers, but as leaders. The same commander who had dismantled the Ethelgard fleet stood at the center of the room, projecting a holographic map of the galaxy. He showed the red trajectory of the incoming threat, a swarm of autonomous, self-replicating machines, a consuming tide that had stripped other galaxies bare. The Great Devourers were real, but they were not myths. They were a gluttonous algorithm made metal. The Ethelgard had been right to be afraid, but wrong in their method. Silence would not save them. The swarm scanned for energy signatures for civilization itself. The Ethelgard tried to hide, the human commander said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. They tried to extinguish a light to stay safe in the dark. That is the logic of prey. We do not subscribe to that logic. He looked around at the assembled races, at the Authari, the Meyer worlds, and even the sullen, defeated Ethelgard representatives. The SOS you ignored was the first warning. The war we brought to the Dominion was a correction of errors, but the real war is coming now. We cannot hide from what is coming. We must meet it. The shift in the room was palpable. The aliens, who had looked upon humans with confusion and then fear, now looked at them with a desperate hope. The humans were dangerous, yes. They were capable of terrifying violence, but that violence was disciplined. It was harnessed. It was a shield. The philosophical core of humanity was revealed not as aggression, but as a stubborn, reckless refusal to accept the inevitability of death. Where the elder races saw fate, humans saw a problem to be solved with high explosives and engineering. A new alliance was forged in that chamber, born from the ashes of the Ethelgard's humiliation. The Dominion, humbled and stripped of its pride, was forced to integrate its fleet into the new defense network. The Xyloth, saved from extinction, provided the crystal tech needed to enhance the sensor grids. And the humans, the dangerous ship that had answered the call, became the spine of the new galactic army. They shared their shield technology, their kinetic weapons, and their tactical doctrines. They taught the galaxy that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the ability to manage it. The final phase of the transition occurred high above the galactic plane, where the combined fleets of 100 nations gathered. It was a sight that defied description. Ships of organic bone, of spun glass, of shimmering energy, all flying in formation with the blocky, gray monoliths of the Terran Navy. The Vigilance was there, repaired and refitted, leading the vanguard. The silence of space was filled with the electronic chatter of a united galaxy. They were no longer waiting to be slaughtered. They were waiting to fight. The human commander stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, watching the sensors as the first tendrils of the extragalactic swarm began to bleed into the system. The foreign SOS had been a tragedy, but the answer had indeed been war, not a petty war of conquest, but a war for existence. The humans had brought the concept of total war to a galaxy that had forgotten how to struggle. They showed the aliens that survival was not a right, but a prize to be won. As the first wave of the enemy swarm materialized, billions of chrome drones blotting out the stars, the fear in the fleet was replaced by a grim resolve. The alien crews looked to the human ships, taking comfort. Oared in their ugly, unshakable bulk, they realized that the humans were not just warriors, they were guardians. They were the monsters who fought other monsters so that the innocent could sleep. The human commander opened the fleet-wide channel. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a species that had spent its entire history fighting against the odds. "All ships," he said. "Weapons free. Let's show them who owns this galaxy." The darkness erupted into light. The dangerous ship had reached the SOS. The answer was now war, and for the first time in eons, the galaxy was not afraid of the dark, for the humans were there and they had brought their fire. The conflict that followed would be written in the history books of 1,000 worlds, not as the end of days, but as the beginning of the Age of Unity. The Ethelgard learned humility. The Synod learned courage. And the humans, they simply did what they had always done. They held the line. The narrative arc of the galaxy bent not toward entropy, but toward the stubborn endurance of the species from Saul. The philosophical implications rippled through the cultures of the Synod. The Authari debated the concept of altruistic violence. The Xylof composed symphonies dedicated to the tungsten rain. Even the Ethelgard, in their barracks and broken fleets, began to study human history, trying to understand the paradox of a race that could be so gentle with the weak and so ruthless with the proud. They found their answer in the human concept of justice, a concept that the galaxy had treated as a suggestion, but which humans treated as a physical law, as immutable as gravity. The battle against the swarm lasted for years. Planets were lost, fleets were burned, but the line held. The dangerous ship became a legend, an archetype. In the darkest hours, when the ammunition was low and the shields were failing, the alien crews would look for the gray hulls of the Terrans, and they would see them there, battered, scarred, leaking atmosphere, but refusing to yield. They saw the humans ramming enemy motherships when their guns ran dry. They saw them detonating their own reactors to seal breach points. They saw a species that had decided, collectively, that they would not go quietly into the night. And in the end, when the last of the swarm was shattered and the debris fields drifted like snow across the nebula, the galaxy was changed. The SOS signal that had started it all was archived in the Hall of Memory, a testament to the moment everything shifted. The foreign SOS was no longer foreign. It was a call from a brother answered by a brother. The answer was war, yes, but it was the war that ended the silence. It was the war that proved that in a cold, indifferent universe, there was one variable that could not be calculated: the indomitable will of humanity. In the quiet aftermath, High Counselor Vrex sat once again in the Synod chamber. The mood was different now. The fear was gone, replaced by a solemn respect. He looked at the human delegation. They were still quiet. They still wore their matte gray uniforms, but now when they spoke, the galaxy listened. Vrex realized that the humans had not conquered them. They had infected them. They had infected them with hope. He closed his eyes and let out a long, sibilant breath. The dangerous ship had arrived. And thank the stars it had. The universe was vast and full of terrors, but now the galaxy knew that there were things in the dark that the terrors themselves should fear, and those things hailed from a small, blue world, and they did not know how to surrender. The SOS had been answered, the war was won, and the peace that followed was built on the iron spine of the Terran coalition. The dangerous ship drifted on, patrolling the deep dark, waiting for the next call, ready to bring the answer once again. The archives of the Xylof would later describe the arrival of the Vigilance in poetic terms. The sky broke, and the mountain fell upwards, and the demons were crushed beneath the weight of a heavy silence. It was a fitting description. For the humans, however, it was just Tuesday. It was just the job. They were the janitors of the void, cleaning up the messes that the elder races were too proud or too scared to handle. And if that job required them to be the most dangerous thing in the sky, then so be it. The answer was always war, until the job was done. Years later, a young Xylof student would ask a Terran veteran why they had come. Why they had risked everything for a system they didn't know, for a people they had never met. The veteran, old and scarred, with prosthetic limbs and eyes that had seen too much, would simply smile and say, "Because you asked." It was the simplest, most terrifying, and most beautiful truth in the galaxy. The SOS was a question, humanity was the answer, and God help anyone who tried to stop the conversation. As the Galactic Synod rebuilt, the architecture changed. The glass was reinforced. Said with steel, the dais were lowered, the hierarchy flattened. The Ethelgard Dominion, now the Ethelgard Republic, began to dismantle their slave camps. The Mire worlds began to explore beyond their swamps. The galaxy was growing up, dragged into maturity by the rough hands of the Terrans. The Treaty of Shadows was burned, replaced by the Charter of Light. And at the signing ceremony, the human representative, the same silver-haired woman who had sat in the back of the room so many years ago, signed her name with a simple, archaic pen. She did not give a speech. She did not boast. She just signed and then walked over to the Xylof ambassador and shook his hand. A gesture so small, yet it carried the weight of empires. The dangerous ship had reached the foreign SOS. The answer was war, but the result was peace, a hard peace, a vigilant peace, but peace nonetheless. And deep in the void, the Vigilance kept watch, a silent sentinel in the eternal night, forever ready to answer the call. The stars were no longer cold, they were merely waiting, and humanity was watching them back. The story of the Xylof rescue became a foundational myth for the new age. It was taught in academies from the core worlds to the rim. It was a lesson in the physics of morality, that evil triumphs only when good men do nothing, and that when good men arrive in a heavy cruiser with railguns, evil tends to have a very bad day. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The foreign SOS was a test, and together they had passed. Final log entry of the TCS vigilance from that fateful day was declassified 50 years later. It didn't contain grand speeches or philosophical musings. It contained tactical telemetry, damage reports, and a single handwritten note from the captain to his wife, scribbled on a physical piece of paper. "Be home late. Traffic is bad. Don't wait up." It was the ultimate expression of human nonchalance in the face of the apocalypse. To them, the war for the galaxy was just a commute. And that, more than their guns, more than their ships, was what made them truly dangerous. They made the impossible look mundane. The universe spun on, vast and indifferent. But in one small corner a fire had been lit, a fire of defiance, and it would burn until the last star went out. The dangerous ship had come home, and the galaxy was finally safe. Act 3, the final integration of the human spirit into the galactic consciousness, was not a sudden event but a slow cultural osmosis. The Synod, once a place of fear, became a forum of strategy. The humans introduced the concept of the volunteer. Before, armies were conscripted or bred. The idea that a being would choose to fight, choose to die for a stranger, was alien. It fascinated the Synod. It terrified the warlords. It broke the logic of tyranny. If a being could not be coerced, it could not be ruled. The Terrans were ungovernable in spirit, which made them the perfect guardians of liberty. Xyloth, in gratitude, erected a monument on their moon. It was not a statue of a human. It was a statue of the Vigilance, carved from the same crystal that the Ethelgard had tried to shatter. It stood 10 kilometers high, a jagged, ugly block of transparent stone catching the light of the twin suns. Inside the crystal, preserved in a vacuum field, was the original distress beacon, the SOS that had started the war. It was silent now, but the message it projected was no longer "save us." It was "we are here." The Ethelgard underwent the most painful transformation. Their society was built on strength, and they had been broken by a superior strength. But in their defeat, they found a new purpose. They became the zealous converts of the Terran doctrine. If the humans were the shield, the Ethelgard would be the sword. They adopted human tactics, human organization, and even human slang. It was a strange sight to see a 7-foot reptilian warrior salute a human officer and bark, "Roger that," but it became commonplace. The two warrior cultures, once enemies, found a kinship in the trenches of the Swarm War. They respected each other because they were the only ones who understood the cost of the line. The Swarm, the cosmic threat that had precipitated the Unity, was eventually pushed back into the intergalactic void. It was not destroyed. Such things are rarely destroyed, but it was made to bleed. It learned that the Milky Way was not a feeding ground. It was a fortress. The Swarm's logic engines marked the galaxy as hazardous and diverted the migration. It was the greatest victory in galactic history, won not by a single superweapon, but by the relentless, grinding stubbornness of a united front. In the end, the title of the story held true. The dangerous ship, humanity itself, had reached the foreign SOS of a dying galaxy. The answer was war, war against apathy, war against fear, war against the inevitable. And because they fought that war, the future was allowed to happen. The dangerous S. Hip sailed on into the endless sea of stars, leaving a wake of freedom behind it. And the silence was broken forever. The philosophical reflection that concluded the age was written by Archminister Thalric, the diplomat who had first watched the humans with skepticism. In his memoirs he wrote, "We looked for gods to save us. We found demons, but they were demons who fought on our side. And in their fire we found our own souls. The humans did not save us from the Ethelgard or the Swarm. They saved us from ourselves. They taught us that the only thing more dangerous than a ship of war is the idea that we are worth saving." And so the galaxy turned, a little brighter, a little louder, and infinitely more dangerous. Just the way the humans liked it. The SOS was answered. The line was drawn. And the dangerous ship drifted into the legend, its mission complete, its engines humming a lullaby of low-frequency power that resonated in the bones of every free being in the universe. The answer was war, and it was beautiful.